Today we are talking about effective ways to utilize the more info field. And this one's exciting because the more info field is super duper flexible, allows you to store anything pretty much you need to store in there. And then what we'll go over today is to how to use that information effectively, go over some really creative and practical examples of how that can be used, what you can put in there and extract, etc. Alrighty, so let's dive in. We're gonna head over to Pipeline. So first, let's briefly talk about what the more info field is, what it does, etc. So the more info field, as most of you probably already know, is a general field that you'll use to store whatever information doesn't already have a field, right? So if you need to store, say, maybe you want to track who the referrer is or your referral source, maybe your escrow number. Some people will track, let's say, their plans, 4 bedrooms, 3 baths, etc. Whatever you need to store that doesn't already have a field is fair game for storing in here, okay? And like I mentioned, we're going to go over different ways of how to use that information in that field efficiently. So let's get into it. So how do we use it more efficiently? Let's start by first talking about how you can set default information to appear in this field, right? For example, whenever I create a transaction, add a transaction, which I'll do in a new tab here, if I've got default information set, that information will automatically already appear in this field, okay? So I've got this information set to default there. The place that I do that is, let me go to a separate tab here, hop over to your admin settings page and scroll down. Any information that you put into this pre-filled default value for more info will appear in on new transactions whenever a new transaction is added, okay? So by simply putting the information in this field, that will default it there. I should mention that the admin info field works very much like the more info field. The only difference is that it's only visible to admins, right? So some of the things that we talk about today, you could do the same types of things for the admin info field if they're applicable to what you need. Alrighty? Okay, so that's how you default that information. When you're doing it, there are a couple recommendations here. One is notice, for example, on this bottom line here, we've got some underscores. That's a nice way of visually telling someone, hey, I need you to fill in this information, right? This information's missing. Go ahead and replace those underscores with some information. So a nice visual cue that this information needs to be filled out. Other methods of supporting getting information in here are to do a yes, no, right? Is this an owner agent? Say yes, they can specify the yes or the no by deleting the one that they don't want, right? Same for maybe REO, question mark, is it escrow, etc. The plan, you can put the underscores there and allow that to be filled in. So those are really beneficial, again, when you want to encourage someone or trigger them to actually input the information. So in that way, it really acts as several different fields that you can put there, okay? So let me switch over now, you know how to do that, to looking at some practical examples of what can be included in there. Okay, the first one is kind of a good segue from what I just talked about, and that is triggering to have information entered. A lot of times you will have those fields that you've entered to be filled in more info to be triggered by tasks to require someone to actually enter them. So it sort of mimics having those fields that you're having filled in the more info field be required. So if, for example, you've got REO here, right? And you want to make sure that someone answers that, you can add a task that says enter REO into more info field, right? Or owner agent, answer whether it's owner agent. So that'll make someone, whoever's responsible, depending on what visibility you've given it here, that will make someone be sure to go ahead and answer that question or enter that information into the more info field. So that's a way of requiring that that field in more info be completed, okay? Another benefit is that it can make your tasks more efficient, right? It's sort of kind of the opposite of what we just talked about. Instead of using the task to require that this information be entered into more info, you can use the information that's in more info to help trigger what's needed in the tasks. So for example, you might have a lot of tasks that are, if applicable, like this lead-based paint here, right? So you can store in the more info field information that helps you determine whether that particular item is applicable or not. So in this case, it would be the year the home is built, right? Which probably isn't the best example because we're actually going to add a year home built field in the near future. But you could put the year the home is built here. That way, when they go to determine whether they need to complete this task, they can see right away what year it was built and know whether the lead-based paint is applicable or not. Okay, so it can work both ways to benefit each other, both tasks to more info. Another benefit is, since this more info field is included on cover sheets, any information that you want to be included on the cover sheet can be added to the more info field, right? Like that could be due diligence date or maybe some other key dates. Whatever information you want to be included on that cover sheet, you can go ahead and put it in the more info field, and that way when you run the cover sheet or attach a cover sheet to a message, then that information will be included. So nice benefit there. Okay. Another benefit to storing information similar to fields in the more info field is that it is searchable, right? So you can use your global search to search information that's in this more info field. And the way that you do that is that if you go down to the more info field, search operator here, which is telling the system only search for what I'm about to type when it's in the more info field. Okay, same, you can search similarly in the admin info field, just FYI, but we're going to do it for more info right now. So if I do info, and then so let's say I'm looking, let's say I've stored the plan, you know, 4 bedrooms, 3 baths, etc. I can actually just type 433. Then I can find all of that configuration, all those transactions that have that configuration there. Likewise, maybe I want to find all those places where I have indicated that the owner agent is yes, right? This is an owner agent transaction. I can search that way. So pretty much any information that I'm storing in there, I can search by that in my global search operator. Maybe I want to find all of those transactions that have me, let's say Fleming, as a referrer, right? I can do that, and that'll find those transactions. Or if I want to even be more specific, I could say where I specifically said referrer Monta Fleming. Okay, and it'll find those. All right, one thing to keep in mind, given searching within that field, is your formatting, right? You want to, when you've set your default information to be added for new transactions, make sure that your formatting is pretty solid so that if someone does change something, for example, let me edit this transaction. So for example, I were to add the plan, you know, I've got clear underscores where I add my numbers and not mess with the whole formatting, right? Or I just take out this no if it's going to be yes, or take out the yes if it's going to be no. Or I replace that with that these underscores with some information. That way when I go to search it, it's nice and consistent. That said, also try to avoid using colons, right? Because colons are used in the search operator, as you see here, in the search operator searches, and that will hinder those. So just avoid using those, use dashes instead. They're more search friendly. You can still use the colons if you don't intend to do a lot of searching, but if you do want to search for exact matches or within the search operators, avoid using colons. And then the last thing I wanted to mention is just fairly straightforward. And that is that when you download your spreadsheets, whether it's the full or the individual year spreadsheets for transactions added during those periods, they will include that more info field, right? So you'll have that in your download to manipulate or display or search however you need to. And that's pretty much it for how to efficiently use your more info field. Just keep in mind that it's super flexible. Obviously, it's just a text field, so you can input anything you want into there, and then utilize these tactics to either find information that's within there or help support getting information in other places like those tasks, etc.